I guess guiding in general on training plans, I feel like a lot of the time people are tempted to pick the training plan. So we have like our training plans, like we talked about the base phase and the build phase. We have 3 different build plans. There's the short, general, and sustained power builds. And those are short is talking about how long the I guess consequential durations of power output will be in the race. Yeah. General, it builds general, so you'll be a bit more versatile. And then sustained for something like 40K TTs where you're really going to be putting out power for a long period of time. That's where we're really focusing on with that. But then when you get into specialty plans, it gets very specific. And that's kind of where we're more going to focus. For the build plan side of things, right, Chad? I mean, you look at the course or you look at how you're going to race it and you say, okay, if I'm going to have to put out a lot of short power and do it repeated, I'll do short.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to determine whether or not you're a short power rider versus a sustained power rider. And if it's not, then you know you're probably somewhere in between, which should lead you toward the general build plan. Yeah,
so on specialty plans, I feel like getting into that and the selection there, I feel like a lot of the time we just pick it based on the course. Like this course has, I don't know, a 40-minute climb right at the end of the race. So then you think I should do sustained, but then again, you know, what if it's got a bunch of rollers before then? It gets kind of tricky.
Yeah, and you have to consider the physiology beyond or behind the demands of not just a single race, but well, in his case, perhaps just a single race. But in most riders' cases, most athletes' cases, the demands of a lot of different types of courses. Maybe similar, but still, I mean, a course with punchy climbs is still a climbing course. A course with sustained climbs still a climbing course, but 2 very different sets of demands with each.
Yeah, totally. And I feel like you kind of have to decide, like, am I fit enough to race this course how I choose to race it?
Yeah,
or will the pace be such that I really won't get to pick and choose and it just is what it is?
Yeah, you brought that up the other day, and I think that's really a very good first question, or a question that has to come early in the whole thought process is, am I fit enough to decide how I'm going to race come race day, or am I just out there to kind of hang in there and see if I can survive it?
Relatively few folks are, right? Like fit enough to say like, I'm going to race this however I want.
Yeah, a lot of people think they are, and then they get into 5-10 minutes of a race and realize, oh, that plan's not going to fly.
Mind. Yeah, it's a little tougher. So I guess let's talk about road racing, since that's, I guess, where we have a lot of questions around, because road racing demands, they vary quite a lot. I feel like if the course has rolling hills, or you plan to race the course like a puncher or punch you, or however you want to say it, but a person that's going to be aggressive and kind of an animator in the race, that would be a different approach than if you were to be going through and it's just going to be, you're going for long bomb breakaways, or it's got really long
defined. Because when I hear that term too in rolling, I like to think of it in terms of like
efforts.
Yeah, efforts. So what kind of, when you hear that, what duration of efforts are we talking about?
I don't know that there's any hard set definition, but by my definition, and therefore the plans, what they target, we're looking at
law.
Yeah, basically. Really anywhere from 3 to 8 minute sort of efforts. You get more than that, and you're starting to lean more toward your more sustainable power. But when you keep it in that 3 to 8 range, you can focus a little more on training that high intensity.
VO2 max.
Yeah, really. And all shades of it.
Some people, like 8 minutes, that's the end of like your max VO2 max power, right?
Yeah, you start pushing beyond 8 minutes, right in there, start pushing up towards 10 and 12 minutes. And again, everything kind of shifts. Yeah,
more threshold.
It's more threshold, more aerobically driven. I mean, substantially more aerobically driven.
So I feel like when you look at whatever race that you're prepping for, like your A race, you should really be looking at it in terms of you should look at the profile, but then also look at it in terms of how you're going to end up racing that, right?
Yeah.
For example, like if you're doing something like Haute Route races, which we'll actually talk about a little bit later, like Haute Route Alps, which just has a ton of very long sustained climbs. In a scenario like that, you're looking at that and you're thinking, yeah, I'm definitely going to be doing something that's going to be more long climbs, more steady power, that sort of a thing.
Yeah, more conservative race approach.
Yeah, where that would change, even if you have something that has really steady climbs, is if you're on a race team and then you're the person that has to be the animator, so your job is to attack or to kind of,
or to cover.
Yeah, cover moves.
You're more of a sacrificial lamb in that case. So you're not really looking at the big picture. You're just looking at that day's stage and what those objectives are to protect whoever has the bigger picture.
Yeah, so in that case, you may very well go for something like the rolling road race plan instead of the climbing road race plan.
Perhaps, yeah.
So pretty much the difference between those two, rolling road race is more of those, like there's the low VO2 max efforts that go like real long 6-minute repeats, but at the over FTP, kind of with those efforts we talked about. And then climbing road race is more of the longer climb, some over under efforts, kind of what you would see on that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
So you're going to hug threshold a little more closely with the long sustained climbs, typically below it, but pretty close to it. So 90%, 95% sort of business. Whereas if you're going to attack the climbs, even if they're short ones, you're going to work above threshold for whatever duration you can withstand it.
Yep.
Yeah. So if you're looking at a road race and you're trying to select which plans to pick, hopefully those kind of guidelines help you. You're not just looking for the actual terrain. You are considering that, but you're also considering how you're going to race.
Yeah, you have to think more in terms of how the body responds to the demands, not what the actual demands of the course are, but how the body will respond to those demands, how your body will respond to those demands. Because you take two racers training the exact same way, you're most often going to get different outcomes. So you have to consider how you specifically will handle that course's demands.
What about Gran Fondo and gravel stuff? I feel like when you get into those, it's more about because they usually end up being longer days, in most cases. Even if somebody does a shorter distance, they usually are going to spend a good amount of time on the bike.
Yeah, it's just a little, I don't know if generic's the right word. It's just, there's not as much variety. You don't have to be good at a whole plethora of things. I mean, with a road racer, you got to be able to do just about everything. And how well you do each of those things is going to impact how well you perform. With a century rider, you pretty much just have to be good at one thing, lasting, doling out a steady amount of power below threshold, but again, reasonably close to it depending on how long it is. I mean, if it's a 50 mile versus a 100 mile, obviously that's going to change. You're not going to ride at 95% for 5 hours, but you could ride at 90%. Yeah, that's still a tall order. But the fact is, longer it gets, you're still sub-threshold, and a small decrement in how close to threshold you ride will really extend that duration, hours in some cases.
So on that, we're putting together... we're not putting together, but the century plan, you could sit century, but we lump those together with Gran Fondo and gravel. We were just talking about this yesterday that, excuse me, I'm dying here. Okay, I'm back. The century plan, we should probably rename that because that's kind of in the last few years gone out of style.
Term's not in favor anymore.
Yeah, century is now Gran Fondo really. Rather than having a specific this is 100K or 100 miles, it's just called a Gran Fondo. And gravel racing, almost all the time, is very, very similar to a century, except it's just on wider tires, right?
Yeah,
so that, it's like you said, Chad, it's going to be predominantly sweet spot. There's not attacks. Maybe someone does attack you want to climb in a Gran Fondo, but the next group will come up in a second, and you'll probably come right back up. All the Gran Fondos and centuries I've done in gravel races, there's always so many groups. Right? They're just group after group after group. There's not like there's one main group and then you get dropped from that like in a road race. Yeah. And you're like, ooh, I have to solo for 80 miles now.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty infrequent occurrence that you have to attack during a Gran Fondo or cover attacks. I mean, it may happen now and again, but it's not something you're going to have to face several times over the course of that event.
You see one person go up the road and you're like, okay, have fun. Right?
See you soon, probably.
Yeah, exactly.
Granted, there's also different ways to race this as well, right? It's not just single, it's not just laid out. You may go into this knowing that you're going to be a person that's going to be attacking, chasing, that sort of stuff.
That's a good point, because if you're doing like Belgian Waffle, which is road gravel, but it's like a race, and you're racing for like the top spot, then I would just call it a road race.
Yeah, I'm hesitant to call that one a gravel race.
Yeah. You can have road races that happen to be called gravel, but if you're going for top 10 overall, completely different. Then it's a road race.
It's a road race, yeah.
But if you're going for 500 out of 2,000, it's not a road race.
It doesn't have to be Belgian Waffle Ride. It could be any race that you're doing. If those demands are similar to that, or at least how you're planning to race it, that's what's really important there. That said, it's important to be realistic with that, because like in my mind, or in our minds, we may picture ourselves being the person that's like animating a race and going for a win. But in reality, there's probably very few folks that can actually do that at a race, right? If you happen to be within that slice, then hopefully, train for that specific way you're going to race it. But otherwise, it's probably better to just have a more, conservative approach, in the sense that you're preparing for the fallback plan, because chances are the pace mixed with the course is going to force you to just race it in a specific way.
Yeah, there's a really vast distinction between racing a course and surviving a course. And I don't want to paint survival as something that's an act of desperation. We're not talking about people just barely finishing. We're talking about people completing it at a steady pace. So survival is probably not the right word, but it kind of hints at what I'm after. Yeah,
totally. I think that the next bit is kind of one of the, but other than triathlon, it's one of the last ones where we talk about like kind of that survival, or kind of like getting brought down to like your, whatever your pace is for all day. And that's cross-country marathon. So we see this like Epic Rides races, or, any like Leadville, something like that, where it's a longer race. And in those scenarios, you do definitely have situations where, once again, you have your course, but then you have to look at how you're going to race it. And chances are those two are going to meet in the middle somewhere, and you're just going to, like Leadville, it brings you to your knees, and eventually you make it across that line, right?
Yeah. The longer the event is, the less explosive or varied it can be. Yeah. It's just kind of the nature of it.
I think a good example is in triathlon, where there's a lot more people who can race a sprint, where in the middle of a sprint, you might attack someone during the bike or during the run, even less for an Olympic. I've attacked people on the run in Olympic.
Sure.
But then in half, that goes maybe the last minute, right?
Attacks don't really look like attacks.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they don't.
In Ironman, even in the pro field, where they can actually race an Ironman, it's so exciting if it happens in a race, because you don't really see it very often. And in the bike, you can't even tell if it's an attack. But on the run, there's like every attack on the run is almost famous because there's so few, and they call it, and there's books written about it, and there's pictures. So that's where we're kind of just seeing the point of you're just trying to do a maximum steady state for the entire event, and that's where XCM cross country marathon, right? Maximum steady state. The Keegan Swensons, they're racing and attacking, but everyone else is just. Yeah, like survival is like I agree. Survival's not the best
cases,
word.
In those cases, I think it might actually be.
When we did it, some of those.
That's where I'm going with that. It was full on survival.
When you get away from that a little bit is when you get into shorter events, really, like when the duration isn't as long. So something like cross country Olympic or cyclocross, they actually have pretty similar demands. Yeah. Interestingly, I think that with cyclocross, when you see the top level pros and how they race cyclocross, it's a bit different than what the most of us have. We've talked about this before. We raced Cross Vegas, and so did Keegan Swenson, and we talked all about it. And we talked about, you can hear that in previous episodes where we kind of saw a big difference in terms of how he put out his power versus us. His was much more stable than ours, but the tide was constantly high. With that said, it's still, relatively speaking, these disciplines are very surgy, like cross-country Olympic and cyclocross.
Even those can be survival. I think it's more of if the pace, like the competitive pace is below your all-out pace, then it's like not survival. Yeah. Like a cross race, it starts out, you're in the lead group, and you're like, ooh, I've got 20 extra watts in here. Yeah. Then it gets exciting. Yeah. Totally. I've been in that group, and you're like, there's no extra watts.
Yeah.
And then you just you just hold on and
you're just trying.
You hope.
That's it. If you're at the end of the rope, you're not racing. You are surviving. So it is really a spectrum. I mean, race where you really get after it and you have a chance at faring quite well, and survival, and then everything that falls in between.
I'm just saying, a lot of the times you can't control it because it's your competition.
Totally.
Or how they look, Carson City, everyone starts out at 350 watts and at a 5-hour day, and you're like, what? What
is going on?
What is going on?
It's not sustainable. That's for darn sure. With cross country Olympic, we in this situation, the specialty plans with TrainerRoad are branded very specifically for the events that you'd be doing. We have a cross country Olympic plan and we have a cyclocross plan, and they really focused on your ability to punch hard and then hold it and then repeat that sort of stuff. So it's not just like a sprint as hard as you can for 3 seconds and then sit back and rest and sprint again. It's more about punching really high into that VO2 range or even above, and then holding that for as long as you can, then repeating those sort of things. So that's where it's really tricky, but that's what those plans try to address. Whereas, and sorry about jumping back here, the cross-country marathon plan is much more about steady power, but your ability to also deal with those spikes within that steady power.
I see some of those are just less frequent.
And that's just because the nature of mountain biking, you always come across little points of terrain where it's really steep little thing, but then you have to stay steady thereafter. So for a race like Leadville, though, you may end up racing it very much like a road race, and there's not as many short, steep little spikes.
I wouldn't call it a road race. I'd call it more of a gravel race.
Sure, yeah.
Because you're not doing attacks or sprinting or surging.
What specialty plan, after having done it, since you did it personally, you would do the Century plan?
That's why I think we should actually rename them Century to Grand Fondo Gravel, because it's directly in there. And two, as we go through all these, we're all of these linked to specialty plans we're going through right now.
Yep.
But one thing, I think we've already mentioned this, but just because it says something on the name doesn't mean if you know a race is going to be more like one of these things, these energy systems, you can totally go over. So actually, cross-country marathon and Grand Fondo, cross-country marathon has a little more spiky stuff. So if you have a little more spikes in your Gran Fondo, maybe you do cross-country marathon.
Right.
And you don't have to overthink it that much. If you just get into a specialty plan and start looking at the workouts, you'll see. I mean, if you get used to looking at power files and you see what those efforts look like, especially when you smooth them down a little bit, you can look at workouts that replicate those exact demands.
Yeah, it's the scary ones. You can tell. They're really high. That's people on the people
totally
know those ones hurt. But
just hard punches, and then the stuff that follows is often right up next to that FTP line. So
that's hard. But it's good.
Oh, yeah,
Makes
it
it
is.
fast.
But, this is why we gradually build over the course of weeks and months to be able to do.
You get the side note, but I'm like Abbott's, which is sweet spot with attacks. I've noticed after doing almost a year of sweet spot, coming in and adding those little attacks destroyed me.
Yeah.
Destroyed me. And that's knowing how I've trained over the last year, that's to be expected, right?
Sure.
And then also, I think I have, I forget what it is, but it's almost the same workout, but instead of sweet spot, it's threshold. I'm actually scared of that one.
Yeah, and that's why those are sprinkled in there in the base plan. We're trying to at least maintain some level of sharpness in an energy system that otherwise goes unnoticed and unmaintained. So if you're just doing sweet spot all the time, you could physiologically still have something there. Maybe you're predisposed. Maybe you're finding that explosiveness elsewhere. Maybe you run or do something else. But if you don't address it, it does go away.
But it should come back quickly, right? Compared to other energy systems. If I've got this really good,
it's just a neuromuscular burst. So it's really more about brain communication to muscle, so neuromuscular communication. So it's not a hard thing to dredge back up. And really, unless you're completely overreached within the interval, you should be able to fire those out almost any time.
I can fire them fine. I can hit the spike.
It's recovering after them.
The quote recovery
because you're working at a high level. I mean, it's just hard to settle back in after a hard effort like that. To settle back into something that's already really close to the height of what you can sustain, that's a tall order regardless.
I think a lot of it too is my mental ability because I'm not used to it. So mentally I hit those and I'm like, this feels so much harder than just being at 90%.
Yeah, but a bit of familiarization with that over the course of a couple of weeks of having one of those workouts per week, and that starts to change.
Yeah, and whenever you're racing or anything else, I've never, you never get to tell a person, I don't like doing these sort of spikes. Please don't.
Please not do that.
That doesn't really work.
The opposite works too, though. If you're used to them and it happens, and then people start getting dropped off.
It's great.
Have you ever been dropped off a group and then you notice, like you have like a 4-second gap, and then you notice they are suddenly slowed down to what your pace is?
Yeah.
Oh, it happens all the time.
And I'm like, if I could have waited 4 more seconds, they slowed down, but you can't get on because there's the
tiny gap and it can't be closed.
And you're actually putting on more power because you're in the wind now. But that 4-second gap.
That's a hugely viable tactic. I mean, if you look at any cross race, any World Cup cross race over the last 2 months, watch Vanderpool. He does exactly that. Works hard enough and long enough to open up a gap, and then that gap usually stays
the same.
I mean, that's it. You just have to get that and then keep on working as hard as everybody behind you, and it plays out if you have the fitness to sustain it, and he clearly does.
And that happens in mountain biking a lot too, right?
Nonstop, yeah.
Nonstop.
Yeah, it's not like it's very rare that this person is just out and out. Well, first of all, if they are just faster than you, then you don't race that person. They go away from you, right? So the people that you are racing with, it always boils down to the fact that they held on for just a little bit longer.
But consider this is a very specific domain. We're talking about short power stuff on a course that doesn't really favor group work.
Right.
So in a road race, you put a rider out there dangling in front of the field. Well, we know how that goes. It almost always gets brought back because it's exponentially more work for that single rider or small group of riders to stay away from a field that's cohesive and actually working together and trading work.
Right.
But in mountain biking, the thing that happens too, so there's less of a draft, but if it's wooded, you get there's so many times where I think I've gapped someone huge, but at the end of the race, it was like 15 seconds or 10 seconds. And if they would have known it was 10 seconds, I bet you they would have put out a lot more power.
10 seconds doesn't seem like a lot.
Yeah.
In retrospect, but in the moment, it's really tough.
I'm saying they don't know, so they're not motivated enough because you get out of sight.
Out of
you
sight,
sit
out of
at
mind.
a corner you count to 10. You're like, that's pretty close. But if it's wooded and they can't see you, it might as well be 20 minutes to them.
They never know if they're closing that gap. I mean, it's and they're flying blind.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what helps. Do you ever have? At Nationals, I think we should go when you go to Nationals. I don't know if you planned that out, but I would love to be able to be on course at spots and give you splits.
Oh, that'd be super helpful.
We should just lie and always be like, 10 seconds.
There are studies about that very thing.
Yeah, right?
And some coaches do it just because it helps.
It helps. Yeah. It's. I feel like, especially like you mentioned in cross-country racing, because of it being tight and line of sight being limited, many times racers just go for a gap. They don't care about time. They just care about getting out of sight, and they just want to disrupt line of sight. And then if that's in place, that's enough. And there are plenty of times where you might be even soloing back, like you had a mechanical or you crashed or something happened, and you're coming back and you're going as hard as you can, but then you always end up kind of settling in at what you choose to be a pace that you can handle.
Yeah.
And then if you come across the line and it's 10 seconds there, then that really hurts. Because,
but if you just a second where you get a glimpse of your competition, I mean, now you're starting to leverage that psychological end of things, and it's hugely impactful. I mean, think about you're finishing a race, maybe a running race, so you could actually hear someone yelling at you rather than just a blurt of noise every time you roll by. If your coach says, "Oh man, you're falling apart, pick a new sport, you're terrible at this," the impact that would have on you, as opposed to you're almost there, you're killing it. You got 10 seconds on that guy and you're growing that gap.
At Kona, you almost hear me. Almost every person I say, looking strong, looking strong.
Yeah, why not?
They need to hear that.
Yeah.
You do.
One last thing, I'm beating this to a dead horse, but our local crit series, we've got this 4-corner crit, and if you get a out of sight on like one of the backside or like the longer stretches, I swear the whole pace of the chase group goes down so much. It's instantly lower.
Pretty predictable, yeah. Unless you have certain motivated riders who simply won't let that happen. Then it's just a bummer.
That's
how it goes, man. That's how it goes. Some edge cases before we get into triathlon, which triathlon's pretty straightforward, but we'll cover that. Enduro, when you're prepping for enduro, I think most enduro racers put too much emphasis on, I need to have fitness to be on the bike all day. And I'm saying that with like quotes. I see a lot of them worry about that more than they need to worry about, or more than they worry about the thing that matters when you're in the time stages, which is your ability to put out a huge amount of power and then do it again and do it again and do it again in very close proximity.
It's the most anaerobic form of bike racing I think there is, short of maybe track sprinting.
Yeah, and then after that, then you're pedaling along, but you'll, as long as you're putting in the time with your training and then you're out on the bike working on your skills and everything else, because that's key with enduro, you're going to accrue that fitness to be able to be on the bike all day. Don't worry about that. That'll take care of itself there. What really will matter is your ability to put out power directly, one after another in very high amounts. So the gravity plan, we recommend for that, because that's what that really focuses on. Duathlon, you've done duathlon in the past, Jeff?
Before we go on that, could the gravity plan, could you ever do use it as a like an extra hard crit plan, like an extra anaerobic crit plan?
Yeah, I imagine you could sprinkle in some of those workouts. I don't know that I would go that training plan route so much as pluck some workouts from it.
If you wanted to be like really short power.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a high level of aerobic fitness and you just want to touch up your anaerobic side, I could see doing that for 3, 4, 5 weeks.
Because the worry would be you would lose your power at threshold.
Yeah,
and then you would just
going to come at the expense of some of your aerobic fitness.
Yeah. Duathlon. Would you just recommend following tri workouts and then omitting the swim?
Yeah. In the to fill that void, since we don't actually have dedicated duathlon plans, it kind of is that simple. I mean, it does free up some extra workout slots, which you can fill if you decide you need to focus a little more on your running, a little more on your cycling, and you have the if you can actually benefit from that. Just because there's an opening on your schedule doesn't mean you have to fill it with a workout. If you're kind of dragging and you see that I have a swim workout today, maybe I could do an extra run workout. It may not be the best thing in all situations, maybe in very few. But it really is as simple as just omitting the swim workouts and following the plan from that point forward. If when those those swim workouts arise, if you have the energy and the dedicate, or not even dedication, if you just know you can benefit from an additional workout, a run or ride workout, then go ahead and slot it in there.
Yeah. And for triathlon, it's pretty straightforward, right? There's sprint, Olympic, half, and full distance options for that.
Yeah, we get pretty specific with the tri plans.
Some people have asked for ultra distance, so even longer stuff, what they should do. And we usually recommend that they follow the full distance plan.
Yeah, just follow a full distance plan, and maybe in the build up to your race, do some longer workouts. Just extend some of those workouts, because we're just looking for extensive fitness, and if the workouts aren't quite long enough to make you, in terms of physiology, they probably are, but in terms of other things that you encounter when you grow those distances and being on the bike for a long period of time, seeing how your body breaks down on a 3-hour run versus a 4 or 5 hour run, these are things that are worth knowing.
Yeah, those 4 or 5 hour runs too, this goes without saying, but don't jump into those. Those are incredible beasts. But the people who do them and do them well, I've known people who do them every weekend.
Yeah,
they go incredibly slow.
Yeah,
it's this incredibly slow pace.
You're just trying to last. You're just trying to. You need to be strong enough to get through. Robust enough.
It's almost robust enough is the right way to say it, because aerobically, to me, it's almost more enjoyable than a 2.5, like a marathon.
Yeah.
Not that I've gone super long, but because you're in zone 1 the entire time.
Right.
So you're in this like you can listen to a book, you can do stuff, you can kind of like look around and enjoy stuff. You just have to keep going.
Yeah.
Where in a marathon, you're like on that tempo high
with
end,
that
and
long
the whole
stuff,
thing hurts.
There's a huge fitness component, clearly, but it's really about durability. How long can you postpone breaking down?
Yeah.
And fueling. And two, we'll cover this. I don't know if this is today or not, but that is the case, I think, for more of a fat adapted athlete. When you're doing these ultras,
it's the strongest case for it,
you
in
have
my
to
opinion.
you're doing a 50-mile run after you did like a 200-mile bike.
Yeah.
Like,
Not to mention the swim.
Yeah, strongest case, right?
Yep.
I would. We've talked about this. I think I would totally go fat adapted in that situation.
I would absolutely give it a shot for sure.
I'd try it. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Makes perfect sense.
Let's cover some key events, I guess, like some big, like notable ones. So we talked about Leadville. The ideal path that we discussed for that, when once again, we're just talking about, we'll run through the 3 phases, sweet spot base, sustained power build, and century plan, right, Nate? Yep. That's what you would do.
Maybe general build.
Yeah, maybe that. Yeah.
One of the, or that. I say just general build to mix it up a little bit because,
And maybe you find that you're very good at really long stuff, and the general build might, fortify some weaknesses, perhaps. So you kind of have to weigh those options. That's how you would pick
for sure.
that, right? Dirty Kansas. That's a commonly asked question on that one. First of all, that's really gnarly. Are you going to do that, Nate? Some people have been asking. Like, not this year, but I mean, like, you kind of hinted at it in a previous podcast.
So if I can figure out my health issues, 100%, I'll do it.
Okay, cool. So
you guys come and support me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just support me. You don't have to do
I
it.
don't want
Suggest it in the right week. I might actually do it with you.
Really?
Ooh.
I don't know. It's,
Whoa.
like I said, in the right week.
Isn't there like a Pico, like a
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
15-mile one?
Yeah.
That sounds more.
But not the crazy one. What's the regular distance?
DKXL is 350.
No.
Dirty Kansas 200.
Okay.
Yeah. They also have 100.
They do have 100.
They have other options too, but yeah.
You do the 100?
Sure.
No, do the
Yeah,
200
why
with
not?
me.
I mean, 100.
Just do the 200 with me.
100 miles. That's just a weekend ride.
I'll still support you guys.
It's going to be like the muddiest.
Yeah,
windiest day.
exactly. I could see that. Yeah, that's what I'm fearing. So with Dirty Kansas, though, sustained power build is probably what you should do.
Yeah.
I know there are a lot of rolling hills. I get that.
It's
but
still very sustained.
It's sustained in terms of think of what your power should be doing over those. And we looked at that with Best Bike Split on and Jeff Kabush when we talked about his efforts on the podcast on Dirty Kansas. You can search that one as well. It was really consistent power, like extremely consistent. The difference between normalized and average power were like,
and even lower level riders, when you hit it on something like that, a course that's that long, that has rolling hills, what are you doing? Maybe 80, 85, maybe 90% of threshold. You're not going.
I think it's the same as Leadville.
Yep. Yeah. I think the
totally.
same plans. Would be the best way to do that.
Hugely similar demands, so same trajectory.
For most epic rides courses, I would absolutely recommend cross-country marathon and then general build or sustained build, depending on the course. But for like Carson City off-road, for example, sustained build wouldn't serve you poorly because they're really long climbs. For something like...
this goes... You just said perfect thing, right? So, and I want people to get this because we get this question a lot.
Cool.
Carson City starts out with a 40-minute climb, right? So you're thinking sustained power because you're going to climb for 40 minutes.
Yep.
If Carson City started out with the first 30 minutes were full of 4-minute climbs, you would probably change like a 4-minute climb and then a descent and a 4-minute climb. You would probably do general build then, correct?
Yep, absolutely.
And that is a key thing that people need to understand. That just because like sustained 40K TT easy, right?
Yeah, makes sense.
But just what you said, like how is this course and how are you going to race this course?
What are the predominant demands of the course? I mean,
or where I'm going to be competitive and stuff. And if Jonathan knows he wants to win one of those races and it's going to have a whole bunch of 4-minute climbs in the beginning, he might even do after general build, he might even do rolling road race or something like that. Even though it doesn't say marathon.
Totally.
Or stick with the marathon and just cherry pick some of those workouts. So such that once a week you're facing those specific demands and actually seeing, I can do this. This is I can do this, and then the rest of my week doesn't suffer severely as a consequence.
And you could do that with TrainerRoad's calendar.
I was just going to say that it's so easy to do, right? If you're doing something like Bentonville, the Oz Trails off road for epic rides, that's the other end of the spectrum. That one is like constant. It's like a roller coaster.
Super surgy.
Just nonstop
Did you pre-ride
rollers.
that?
I did, yeah.
Is it fun? Flowy?
It's amazingly fun.
I think I would be pretty
You
good
would
at
love that course.
Is it, how technical is it?
Very non-technical, relatively speaking.
Yeah, I think in general, I think all mountain bike courses should be required to be fun and flowy.
Of course, right?
And then there's like, you can do the marathon ones and long stuff, but everything else should just be flowy.
Yeah.
Sometimes they put in these angles where it's not.
The trails are incredible there. I'm actually making a trip out there, not for the race, but making a trip out there this year just to go ride it because I like it so much.
Is that the Walmart people who did that?
Yeah, yeah.
Can you tell the side note? I'm sorry, I'm distracting, but I want to tell people about this because people don't understand.
It's like Walmart is based out of this town, Bentonville, Arkansas, right? That's where their headquarters are. And they wanted people to come to their headquarters. That's where Sam Walton started Walmart, the whole thing. But they wanted people to come to their headquarters, but it was this tiny little town. And they had this problem where basically they would, if a company, so if you look at it, like a huge chunk of Fortune 500 companies are set in Bentonville because of their partnerships with Walmart, but their employees don't live there. Or they didn't for a long time. And they just flew in for the week. They would work, then they'd fly back home because they're like, oh no, Bentonville is a tiny little town in Arkansas. I don't want to go there. But so what they did is they basically said, we're going to invest a huge amount of money, the Walton Foundation and plenty of other resources, into making it like the ideal place to live. And especially for people that like outdoor active lifestyles, because they figured those are like the stars in companies and those sort of people. So that's what they want them to be there. So basically it's like
all the listeners to this podcast.
Exactly.
Superstars.
So they made this big bet on basically like, we're just going to make this the best place to be an active person and live. And that will then bring more people. And it totally has worked. But so all the trails that you see, they have like, it's not like you kind of hack in a trail with a pickaxe. Then after that, hopefully it gets approved by a trail organization, like what happens in many places. They have trail companies that are specifically, they are hired to build trail. They know how to build trail. They're engineers. They do incredible work on these things. And the trails are like a masterpiece. And right from the town square, there's like single track that leaves out of the town square. It's like amazing.
Do you know how much money they spend on professional trail building?
Oh, it's a lot. Well into millions and millions and millions.
Yeah.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And it's so cool. And the town, it's like the little town square, you feel like you've jumped back in time. And then there's like amazing restaurants, It's like a hidden gem. It's so cool. And the topography there is like basically like just like if you were like a 30,000 foot view, it's like somebody kind of like peppered the ground and there were like small detentions everywhere, right? So they call them haulers, but basically it's like little rises of, 50 or like 30 to 100 feet. 100 feet would be the tall ones. So the course is single track that just goes over those non-stop. So it's like fun coming down. It's cool.
The people who build trails are like the heroes of mountain biking.
Yeah.
That being said, the professionals who have extra money to even do it, like
it's amazing
for better equipment and better features. Everyone's got to try that once because I don't want to knock the people that do it for free because we wouldn't survive a sport without them.
Right.
But do have a chance to do it where people have this big budget and a
cool.
whole team working full time.
The trails just like they don't allow you to stop grinning. Like the whole time you're riding, you're like, oh, that's so much fun. It's really cool. So yeah, if you're doing something like that though, then it really depends on kind of, you might want to shore up your weaknesses, but that one, I would definitely do rolling road race for that one. Because that's going to be working on a little bit of the more, the repeating efforts that you might put out.
Sure.
And I wouldn't do sustain for darn sure.
Not even like crit though? Is it too?
You could do that.
How long are the climbs?
I think that the longest climb that I did there on the course was probably somewhere around a minute and a half.
So I would think even shorter than
and
rolling.
You can do that.
Yeah, you could do cyclocross or
cross-country Olympic. Yeah. Really, it comes down to how you plan to race it because...
Yeah, cross-country Olympic.
And I feel like the tricky part is if you go into it with a crit plan approach, it's going to be like really hard. Like, I guess that if you plan on surging really hard on those climbs, that isn't going to last long.
Yeah. So again, we're not talking the demands of the course. We're talking about the demands you're going to ask of your body or you're going to impose on your body.
Yep. Yeah. So that's why I would err toward the side of the more rolling road race side because hopefully you're going to smooth those out instead of just jam as hard as you can on each one.
This goes back to what we talked about last week, Chad, where maybe the high density on-offs, 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off at 120 or maybe growing that up to 130. You could put that progression into your plan if you know you're going to do a race that's just like this. Because I would think, Jonathan, if you could pace those where over 20, I think I just did Taylor, it's 20 minutes of those, or Taylor -2 is 14 minutes, 20 minutes of those in a row. Yeah. If you could pace that evenly, you would go so much faster than going all out for the first four and then less and less and less and less and then just surviving the last.
Like Keegan Swenson won that one this year. He got it because he chose to throw down a really hard breakaway, but then thereafter his power was extremely consistent.
Smooth.
and he basically just went for the get out of sight thing. And then after that was just trying to be as smooth as he could.
Yeah. Did he hold the same gap? Do you know?
I think that he did. He crashed really hard on a bridge. It was really slippery. And then, and I think he got a little panicked, and that's when things got down, but then he ended up stretching it. But yeah, I think he more or less managed it. So, as some other events that would be popular that we see, BC Bike Race this is the mountain bike side of things. The last mountain bike one we'll talk about, but stage racing, a lot of people ask, like, since it's a stage race, do we just throw out everything that we talked about now? And the answer is no. You still train the same way for those demands. You want to make sure that you can do hard days back to back. So a handy thing that you can do, and try to make this so that it's not really close to the event so you don't suffer any consequences that could throw off your training. But as you're going through the base or the build phase, look at things and maybe try stacking those workouts where you may have an easy day in between. Try stacking it back to back to see what your body does and how it recovers from something like that. That's what I would recommend. Chad, I don't know if you have anything else to add.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I kind of lost focus here for a second. Someone said that my mic wasn't sounding.
Yeah, you're right.
Good.
But we got it. Check it live after the fact, or check it after the fact when it's archived, and it'll be all taken care of, folks.
Are you still off for the live?
No, we're good.
Okay,
so
good.
When we talk about another one that we see, Fred Witten Sportif, that one, a lot of people ask about that one in the UK, and a lot of you ask about a whole bunch of different races and common ones, but hopefully the principles that we've been able to give you, you can apply to basically look at what's the terrain that the course is held on, and then how am I going to race that terrain, and then look at a training plan that goes after that. Yep, absolutely. All right, now that we know which plans we'd select, let's go into how we'd adjust them a bit. From Max, he says, hi at TrainerRoad, as there were some questions lately of which plans to repeat or double up on when your A event is quite a while in the future. I would like your comments on the other side of the spectrum. I'm preparing for a long-distance triathlon with the start of March, and he says, due to life circumstances, I just started structured training in mid-November. I carried some fitness, but jumped back to a base plan. And he says that he went to our sweet spot-based low-volume plan, and he says he's just adding on 2 to 3 outside rides a week. So he says, with 9 weeks before the event, should I look toward a specialty plan or continue with a build plan to make the most of the time? Keep the good work. So I guess outside of this, maybe the best way, Chad, that you would recommend that people shorten a plan if they don't have enough time to finish the whole thing.
Yeah, and it always comes back to what level of fitness you're bringing to the table. So if you have a high level of fitness, you have much more flexibility than if you don't. So if you're starting with the basics, you have to build the basics before you layer anything on top of it. I mean, that's our approach. We pyramidize, however you want to refer to it. But until the more rudimentary or fundamental forms of fitness are in place, it's really hard to build anything on top of that and expect it to be the sort of fitness you actually want.
Mm-hmm. So in this case, general build. So I'm going to get not general build, but build before.
Just maintain the sequence. You're not ever going to see specialty inside of 9 weeks. And if you're if you're just barely into sweet spot base, if just into your 12-week base plan, that might be all you get through. And that's a fine place to start. Even then, I wouldn't recommend, unless again you have a high level of fitness or a reasonably high level of fitness, I wouldn't bypass the base phase.
I don't know if this may be a mental thing, but I feel like I've never had a, quote, high level of fitness. You know what I mean? Like looking back after the fact, I was like, oh, I did have one back last February.
It just happens if people race a lot. They're not specifically training for anything, but they're doing a lot of racing. Then maybe they take a couple weeks off and then they come back to it. Do I really need to start at base? Well, maybe not.
That's what I mean of just describing that to people. Like is it a certain watt per kg? But it's really like amount of volume that you have taken into it, right?
Just knowing that your body can handle a fair amount of abuse, that it's capable of doing a fair amount of work and it recovers pretty well from it.
Yeah.
Okay. Something to add to this too is I think a lot of people misunderstand that you can start racing very early on in your
that's
phases,
absolutely by design. So and this is part of the reason why we don't go the traditional base route, because it cultivates really unidimensional fitness. Mm-hmm. You have a great big aerobic base, not a whole lot you can do with that. But if you start with sweet spot base and the variety that's within the sweet spot base plans, it's not just sweet spot work. There's also some VO2 max work. There's some neuromuscular bursts, and it's varied. It's quite varied with that specific aim. I want people to be able to work through 6 weeks of sweet spot base and go be able to have a pretty good race. Work through another 6 weeks and have an even better type of race, or higher level of performance. Yeah. Work through build and be able to race quite well, and then specialize and be able to race that type of race really well.
Mm-hmm. I almost feel like sweet spot base 2 could almost be renamed to like build prep, or I don't know, something like that. It absolutely
is, yeah.
Because it's more of a...
It's like a hybrid build.
Yeah, it's halfway in between. Mm-hmm. It's like, or call it post base.
That I think is a
Pre-built.
really important 6 weeks. That's the one plan I wish nobody would skip. Even if you bypass Sweet Spot Base 1, please do Sweet Spot Base 2, because what you get over that 6 weeks is a really good cross section of what you need to do a lot of types of races.
Totally. I think in start rate, don't worry about starting to race too early. Granted, if you're really putting your priority races and stacking them all in and compromising your training because you're trying to race so much, that's one thing. Hopefully you can increase their frequency or really kind of focus it toward your A event. But a common question that people ask is, when can I race? And yeah, you can
Anytime.
start. I've had really, really, really good races and performances in Sweet Spot Base before.
I'm planning on it. I got my first.
Oh, I've had.
Yeah, so here's a good example. Crit season, I want to do a bunch of crits and get upgrade to 3. Over this summer, it's a long season, right? So the first one is going to be right at like kind of the end of Sweet Spot Base 2. But I think it's going to be, I'll have enough fitness to do great in it in Sweet Spot, or I don't know. If there's fitness, then there's handling and tactics. So they're two different things. Yeah. But my fitness should be at a level, and my punchiness should be good by then, based on the amount of workouts I'm going to do it before.
Absolutely.
So just to your point, you should be able to race that. And if you have a long season, if I had built it up where I was just ending or starting specialty now, it could be harder for me to maintain that and do rebuilds and stuff all the way through till July or August.
Oh yeah.
I did not like myself.
Get pretty tricky.
Yeah.
Especially, and we talked about this a lot of times. You maintain or you build yourself to a high level of fitness. Last thing you want to do is watch it slip away. So you do everything you can to hang on to as much of it as you can,
and you just
in
do
the
more
process
when it slips.
You end up hobbling yourself. It's not ideal.
Could you ever do 2 specialties back to back? Specialty is a little bit easier than that.
I don't see why not, especially if they have overlapping demands. I wouldn't go from one end of the spectrum to the other. 40K TT to criterium racing. Although there's even a case for that. Yeah.
What though if I did? This is crazy. But what if I did criterium and then I just did criterium again? And maybe didn't even change my FTP. I like my fitness. I'm like, it's not too much.
Yeah. I mean, you'd just be looking at sustaining, or maybe
I would sustain. That's the whole idea of sustain.
Yeah, if that's all you're after.
To be able to race kind of fresh every weekend.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to improve, you got to do one of two things. You have to escalate the training load or stress score, or you have to increase your FTP. Ideally, you do a bit of both. And
in my personal experience, what I've found, which is really tough about that approach, is that if I follow the specialty plan through completion, in most cases, it's brought me to a point where I'm peaked, right? That's the whole goal of it.
Yeah.
And it gets hard to maintain that. There's it's difficult.
It does, but over the years you can ride that train for a longer and longer duration.
That's the key. Over the years you accrue the experience to understand how your body is responding.
Understand it, and physiologically it's just more capable, more robust, to use that word again.
This is off the cuff, but what I'm thinking is by not increasing my FTP and redoing it again, like in season, you always want to be kind of fresh for those weekend races. Yep. And so that would I would put less stress on my system during the week because it's not an increase in stress.
I think that's actually a really good fit for a race-packed season.
Yeah, and even if more than 8 weeks.
That race pack just means weekends. It doesn't have to be a Tuesday night and a weekend onslaught. It can just be you want to do enough to touch it up over the course of the week, be fresh on the weekends, and repeat.
A Tuesday night and a weekend. Because some of these
that's almost your training plan right
exactly,
there.
Right? Then it's maybe a Thursday, but even that Thursday is probably not very hard.
I don't know that I would do any intensity outside of that. A couple times a week is enough. And you start,
3 whole races.
Start dipping into that third, you see
tough.
hugely diminished returns, if you see returns at all. And they're just better ways to spend that time. Yeah. You can do, I mean, you can work on skills, you can work on flexibility, mobility, you can work on just extra rest, easy miles, whatever.
Yeah. 2 points I want to nail home that you already said, but I just really want to make sure people understand is, when you're doing that sort of approach, it can be tricky to maintain. There are 2 things that time provides in this case is a lot of you become a more robust athlete. You have a more substantial aerobic base to pull from, so then you can kind of keep the tide higher, so to speak. But then you also learn to understand the signals that your body gives you, because those 2 things are really important to keep track of. Otherwise, you can find yourself in a situation, especially because let's say you do well in one of these races, and then you're just like, bring every race to me. Because like after you do well in one race, you're just like, I'm starting for races.
As the years,
you've said this before. You put on your calendar. You're like, ooh, what races? Oh, this is a 6-hour drive. I could make this.
Yeah. You start doing it, and then the tricky part is managing your excitement levels in that respect, and kind of going, if I do this, it might push me over a little too far.
Yeah, as the years pile up, especially if you've been consistent or reasonably so over the course of those years, you get your fitness base grows and your knowledge base grows. And between those 2 things, you learn a lot about yourself as an athlete, and you become a more capable athlete on both levels. And I mean, there's a reason why athletes, endurance athletes, are so competitive beyond 35 years of age, up to 55, 60 years of age. It's because some of these adaptations take place over the course of multiple years. I mean, some of these fiber type transitions that we've touched on in the past aren't quick occurrences. They take literally years.
Yeah, that's how it goes. Let's go into Matt's question. He's talking about time off and how you adjust. Another common question we have. He says, this is my first off season attempting to do structured training throughout the winter. I live in Germany and my training goals are centered on fitness and improving my personal performance at sportives such as the Tour de Flanders, Liège-Bastogne-Liège, and the classic alpine climbs in the summer. That sounds like some good races to pick from, man. He says, my question is on fitting winter sports into the training plan. This winter, I'd like to know how to fit my ski trips into a phase, apropos for Chad and I.
I know why you guys
highly.
Yeah, Chad and I are going to Powder Creek Lodge.
Opportunity to brag a bit.
Ski trip tomorrow.
Yeah.
Tomorrow.
Yeah, 2 podcast listeners. Thank you so very much to the Peachels and Powder Creek Lodge.
Powder Creek Lodge.
We're excited to go to it.
I'm sure we're going to talk plenty about it afterward too.
Oh yeah, you'll get sick of us talking about it. So
I'm already sick of it.
especially if I come out of it with the fitness I think I'm going to gain.
Or alive too. Yeah, that's a good thing.
Yeah,
hopefully Chad comes out alive.
I prefer.
He says, should I try to fit all the workouts in consecutively before I leave on a 5-day trip and then squeeze the next week's together in the remaining days of the following week? Or should I consider my days on the mountain a replacement for the workouts I miss? Would it be better to pause the plan altogether and just start again at the workout I left off on beforehand? Says the Tour of Flanders Sportive is on the 6th of April, and I'd love to be setting personal bests on the Koppenberg and Potterberg this year.
Should we step through each one of those and pick them apart?
Let's do it. I like it. So I guess the first one that he asks is, should he basically 5 days that he's going to miss of training, should he try to pepper those into the existing plan and just try to fit it all into the weeks in front and back?
Yeah. So if he's talking about taking all of his intensity workouts or quality workouts and stacking them end to end over 5 days, I say go for it if you're going to recover for 2 weeks afterward.
Yeah.
And I don't think you are. And even then, it's a questionable approach. So this just goes back to the tried and true, make your hard days hard, easy days easy, and this flies directly in the face of that. So
that would be, that first situation. So it's clear that would almost be like a training camp. Where you're going to be doing like
it fully is
8 days of extremely hard workouts in a row.
Yeah.
This is going to smash you to the ground.
You have to have a body that can withstand that. And
the recovery period after.
Yeah, and the recovery period afterwards has to be substantial. I mean, that's a lot of damage you're doing to those muscles, to your endocrine system, and it takes a while for the body to bounce back from that.
And what we're talking about, I guess, in this case is, 5 days of very, I should say, physically demanding work that he's going to be doing, because a ski trip like that, it isn't like he's sipping Mai Tais on the beach.
Yeah, see, that's...
So you want to consider the demands that you have. Like, even if it's a work trip and you're not doing something physical, it's probably not recuperative, right?
Still stress of some form.
Yeah, so consider that. Even though you're not on the bike, you're still accruing stress in some respect, most likely, unless it's a full-on vacation. And in that case, we've talked about that before. You can try to squeeze it in and kind of do a training camp because you know that you're going to have time to just fully recover thereafter.
And try not to fall into the trap of seeing workouts as boxes you need to tick off the list. It's not about getting them done. It's about benefiting from them, about reaping greater performance capabilities. And you're not going to do that if all you do is bury yourself in fatigue and then go pile more fatigue on top of it over the course of a ski trip.
Yeah. So the other thing that he says, should I consider my days on the mountain a replacement for the workouts I miss? This is where it's tricky too, because like Chad and I, we're going backcountry skiing. We're going to be doing a ton of aerobically, I guess we're going to be building our aerobic fitness, right?
Really, yeah.
But it isn't necessarily making us faster cyclists. In fact, I'd argue that it
is. It's laying foundation for us to become faster cyclists, but that's going to come with different, more specific training afterward. It's not going to happen over the course of this, but what we glean or what we gain from this 5 day or 7 days in our case is potentially really beneficial.
Is that a humble brag?
I think Chad's going to do his two on
very
one
not
off.
a brag.
I think the single track 6 thing where he alternated, I think.
I'm going to play it by ear. I'm going to see how my body feels. This isn't a race. I'm not committed to every single day of skiing. If I feel lousy one day, I'm either going to trim the day or skip it or whatever. I'll take it as it comes.
Smart.
But the fact is, we stand to gain a lot from this if we do it right. And if we come back and we give ourselves a little bit of a break before we dive headlong into the hard stuff, which is going to be hard not to do considering we have 24 hours of Pueblo just around the corner.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, the analogy for other people, what I think about this is you see a runner or a swimmer come in to start cycling. At first, they're horrible, but their improvement is extremely fast.
Steeper learning curve.
Yep. So as they specialize their aerobic fitness more into cycling, they get really good really fast. Actually, Justin Rossi, he's a good example of this. He was a Division I collegiate swimmer, right?
Really good.
Yep. And then I remember he was in a race with me and he attacked us off the front, dropped us all. But I think it was like a year or maybe it was a year, and he was a Cat 1 racer, but he wasn't amazing. He wasn't a Cat 1 racer on his first day.
I just remember I used to be able to smoke that guy. Yeah. And now I can't. He can ride me off his wheel.
Yeah. That's how it works.
That's what he's second at TT Nationals by, what do you do, 370 watts for an hour? And Super Aero? Yeah. It's pretty good. On a TT bike.
No, he's a good athlete. He's a good aerobic athlete or endurance
But
athlete.
I'm just saying, so you can't, just to Matt's question, you can't think that you're going to go do skiing for 6 weeks and then come back and your FTP is going to be higher.
Right. It doesn't work
that's your point.
Really unlikely.
Yep.
Yeah.
And now the last thing that he poses, would it be better to pause the plan altogether and start again at the workout I left off on? That's the approach that I'm taking. On our calendar, I basically pushed the week down of training. So then I left off. I'm going to leave off today at one point, and then I'm going to pick up.
And you're well invested into your training process. On the other hand, I'm like the opposite end of that in that I've only done a couple workouts. So even if that was my first workout of or first week of a plan, and then I go do this and I come back, I probably wouldn't jump back into the second week. I'd probably just start anew, and I'd probably do that same approach even if I were a few weeks into a plan. Yeah, just because you're building on something. I'm kind of starting from scratch.
It's also, I think, your age, how quickly you lose fitness, and what your recoverability is.
Huge concerns.
I believe Jonathan, being younger, probably recovers better than you do.
Sure.
I would say the thing that I would do is repeat that same week. So even though you have the week off, make sure you come back rested.
Sure.
A lot of times too, like the day you get back from vacation, I do a workout.
Super motivated. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it'll be different considering how physically taxing this is. Yeah. But when I got like on a business trip or something where you can't do a heck of a lot, you come back and man, you're just super eager to get back at it. Yeah. It's usually a terrible workout too.
It is. But just repeating that same week, it's a little bit more humane. And then too, when you get in that, like, if I lost something or not, like right away, or if I need to take more rest. Because you do that first workout that you did 2 weeks ago and you can't get through it, you're like, I need more rest.
Yeah.
Or I need to go back maybe 2 weeks in the plan.